So I started appreciating Bitcoin not just as an asset, but as a technology. And then once you understand the technology, how do you empower someone with whatever, all their money in their head or in their hands? And how do you empower someone to move all their assets from here to there without asking permission? That leads you to the ideology, right? And the ideology is based upon, a protocol that empowers technology, that creates an asset. But ultimately, the ideology is, self-sovereignty, privacy, individual rights, and, the sovereignty of the individual, and also property rights and freedom. And I think that once I got involved, I started looking for a solution to a treasury problem. So I kind of got involved because I had an economic problem. And then in the research, it leads you to understand the technology and appreciate the combination of cryptography and proof of work and energy. And then once you start following all the Bitcoiners, you get drawn into the ideology. And then in the ideology, people start to cause you to question basics. For example, what is inflation? I would have accepted the party line inflation is CPI. And then as soon as you realize inflation is not CPI or inflation, and you can generate as many inflation metrics as you wish to generate, then you realize, well, I can just cherry pick any inflation. And so the best possible situation is to run an economy with 12% inflation while I convince the people that it's 2% inflation, because the cost of capital really is 12%, but they think it's 2%. And the difference of the 10% I get to give to anybody else I want, right? So every pension is indexed at CPI, so I'm raising your pensions at 2%. I'm inflating the money supply at 10 or 12%, right? And that leads you to question a lot of things. Well, if the inflation rate isn't correct, then maybe GDP isn't correct. How do you actually measure gross domestic product, if it's not inflation adjusted? And I think the CEO of Microsoft, made a point, a very quiet point no one noticed, which is, the economy is shrinking. It's not growing. In nominal terms, people will perceive the economy to be growing, but once you put in place the right inflation rate, the economy is shrinking. Nobody in the modern era wants to admit that their national economy is shrinking due to political policy. Well, that leads you to start looking at all these other things like PPI indexes. What does that really mean? And then what about unemployment? How can you have an unemployment rate of 2 or 3% when 45% of the people don't have a job? Like what's the definition of unemployment? Well, we only count people as unemployed if they wish they weren't. Huh? Huh? So all of these metrics that talking heads on TV, they argue about, they're all synthetic faux metrics, and you can build an entire world and a trading strategy and an ideology around synthetic, cherry-picked false metrics. Or once you discover Bitcoin, you start thinking, well, if the GDP's not right and the unemployment's not right and the inflation's not right, then what is right? And so I think that the Bitcoin opened that door for me, and it caused me to question a bunch of other things I'd taken for granted. And that leads you to, read, The Creature from Jekyll Island. And then it leads you to read everything by Murray Rothbard, A History of Economic Thought, and you discover Austrian economics. And then it causes you to go back and you rethink all of history. Like I go back and I reread the history of the world. If you read Durant's Story of Civilization, he wrote 15,000 pages on the world. Most people didn't read 15,000 pages of world history when they were 18 years old. But if you did, you didn't understand inflation, and you didn't understand money, and you didn't understand politics, and you hadn't lived through a war. And so you misinterpret or you shallowly interpret what's going on when you go back and you read history again, after you've lived through an actual war or a currency meltdown, or you live in 2020, right? You see one part of the economy being destroyed, another part of the economy being lifted up by the political action of a few people. And then you watch the media and you realize there's one set of media that doesn't even recognize there's a problem. And there's another set of media that takes a totally different point of view. And then you realize that news is just a curated stream of opinions. And if you wanted one set of opinions, you could watch one set of channels. If you want another set of opinions, you watch another set of channels.